All right, welcome everyone to Adaptive Content from Multiple Devices with Ann Rockley. My name is Vincent Donadio. I'm the Interactive Media Manager at Data Conversion Laboratory. If you follow us on Twitter or Facebook or Google+, or visit our website at all, I'm the guy who does all of that. For those of you who are not familiar with DCL, we convert and organize content to create electronic documents, populate databases, publish on the web, and get it ready for tomorrow's technology. DCL services help you refine your document conversion strategy, identify document redundancy, extract metadata, and transform legacy and future documents for real needs today and in the future. Today we have Ann Rockley, and we are very happy to have her with us today. And she'll be telling you a little bit about what she does, and then she'll dive right into adaptive content.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm going to be speaking about adaptive content for multiple devices today. The Rockley Group is a consulting group, and we specialize in helping organizations to move towards content management and effectively do digital publishing. We work with organizations to analyze their requirements, take a really good look at their content to determine how they can optimize it, structure it, module it, set it up for reuse. We do a great deal of work in XML, either XML early or XML first, in helping organizations to move beyond one-off type publishing to multi-channel, multiple device publishing. So I'm just going to start going through the slides here. And let's see. The slides are not moving forward for me. There we go. So if we could, there we go. Okay. So one point, I noticed my font is doing some funky things here. So if we have some oddball wraps, you'll understand. So in general, what is adaptive content? And when we look at adaptive content, we're looking at content that automatically adjusts to different environments and different device capabilities. So it can detect and understand what your customer is using as they're using your content. And in so adapting, adaptive content can deliver the best possible customer experience. And it does that through a variety of different ways, but it can filter content. So it can say, you know, we're not going to display all of this at this point in time. We're going to layer it. We're going to show you certain pieces of information, allow you to scroll or link down through greater or lesser detail. And it does it all automatically. You do not have to manually set up the internet each time. So when we take a look at adaptive content, it adjusts to any device. That's certainly one of those we're having today with the proliferation of devices, is trying to figure out how do we do it for this one, how do we do it for that one. Well, the software is aware and can adjust as required. It can display your content in any desired order. So just because you look at it on a desktop in one format, or in print, if you're doing print-based books, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to present it in exactly the same way. You can present it in a different way that makes sense for mobile or other devices. It can also respond to different customer interactions. So if they respond to something, they select something, then it can respond back. So it becomes more than just content. It becomes more like interactive, application-oriented content, though it does not necessarily need to be an actual application. We can also have content adapt based on your location. So where are you at any point in time? It can give you the information that's relevant to that. And it can bring in content from other sources. So you may have content that pulls in a data stream from a database, from a financial website, all sorts of different things. It can adapt to that. So obviously the biggest reason that we're moving towards adaptive content at this point in time is the whole impact that we're seeing in terms of mobile. And these are just some of the statistics that found in the last few months. But 38% of U.S. cell phone users, or approximately 89 million people, access the internet on their phones. So that's a lot of people. And more than 47 million mobile users access the internet daily. So we know that that's the way people are accessing their content right now. They also are expecting very early in the year that the combined shipments of smartphones and tablets will exceed that of PCs in 2011. And that is going to have a dramatic change on the way businesses do business, on the way others use information and use their different devices. 60% of the time spent on a smartphone is a new activity, so something that people have maybe never done before. So you've seen a lot of the ads, and they'll say, "Oh, you want to do this? We have an app for that." People are discovering all sorts of things that they never even knew that they needed to do, but it's really cool, and they're doing it. So they've got a lot of activities that are happening, things that you would never have done on a basic phone before. And they're expecting that global mobile traffic is going to grow 26 times over the current volume over the next 5 years. There are also, we've been taking a look at many of the numbers in the U.S., but there are 5.3 billion mobile subscribers worldwide. 77% of that population is in the areas of China and India, and growing tremendously. So we're seeing an even faster growth rate around the world. So what is mobile design all about? A lot of people, when we talk about it, they respond and say that, well, we have to design our content to fit on a smaller screen. That's really what designing content for mobile is all about. But you're actually quite wrong about that. It's not just about resizing your visuals. That is not the solution to platform problems. If any of you have ever gone to a site and taken a look at what happens automatically when that site detects that you're on a mobile phone and it hasn't really been designed for a mobile phone, yeah, you'll probably get content which fits on the screen, so you're not having to expand and pinch and scroll and move and shift all over the place. But it won't be set up in a logical way that somebody can actually use that information. The menu structure may not be appropriate. The navigation is not necessarily appropriate. The links are not appropriate. You may still have tons of content that someone has to scroll through in order to find the relevant information. So yes, it fits on a smaller screen, but it's not a very effective user experience. So in the olden days, and unfortunately I go back that far, when we first started to move print online, there was a lot of recognition that it just didn't work. And there were a number of different reasons why it didn't work. And essentially the page size was different. And I have the word page in the title because we're not really looking at a page, but even the word page is carried over into things that we call web pages. So in essence, what you can look at one point in time, it was different. We could get a whole lot more text on a tip page than we could initially on a screen-based page. So we had differences in resolution. The navigation was obviously very different. So again, working in print, we had people moving through information in a very linear way. Well, it wasn't the same when we went online. There was also, if you pick up a book or a stack of paper, you can say, well, that's about an inch thick. There's a lot of information there. You have an understanding of the breadth and the depth of the information. But when you're presented with a single screen, you don't know how much information is there. It's very, very difficult for people to get a full understanding of the kind of content that's available to them. The searching was different. So it used to be you went to a table of contents or you went to an index, but then you went to search. You put in tags and you typed in words and phrases and things like that. Essentially, everything was different. And we had to rethink content for online. It wasn't as simple as saying, file save as online. Oh, isn't that pretty online? Maybe you got the basics there, but you certainly didn't get effective content. It was different. So when we look at that today in our mobile world, a lot of people are, as I said, thinking that, oh, all we have to do is scale our content to fit mobile. But look, the page size is different. The resolution is different. The navigation is different. The depth and the breadth is different. The searching is different. All of those are exactly the same issues that we had when we first moved print online, except now we're dealing with many more devices than we had in the early days of print going online, many, many more. The way people are working with information is very different. It's not a very focused, concentrated way of using content. The statistics are showing that people spend a whole lot less time doing something when they're in a mobile environment. And so that means you're going to lose them even faster than you would with a desktop and web. So again, everything is different. We really have to rethink what we're doing with our content for mobile. So some of the issues that we're finding when we're working with companies who are moving their content either from a more traditional desktop website to mobile, or people who are moving specific non-website related content to mobile, is they're not really designing it for mobile. If they are doing a traditional website, many times it's a website and a mobile app. But the problem with that is it's twice the work, or maybe even more than that. And you no longer have a single place where you can update your content. You have multiple places where you have to update your content. And it's very, very difficult to keep everything synchronized. Mobile apps are very time-consuming, expensive. And certainly in the early days, all of about a year and a half ago, when we were doing mobile, apps was really the most effective way to go. We're starting to see that change with some of the new ways of presenting information like HTML5 and other types of software. So these automatic web to mobile are not useful. And we have to, as I said, rethink that content. We also have the whole area of ebooks. And ebooks can be read on a dedicated e-reader like the Kindle, we're showing the Kobo there, or it could be read on a smartphone, on a tablet, those sorts of things. But again, the whole thing is happening over again. Page size is different, resolution for navigation is different, et cetera, et cetera. And we're also, and just the example I'm showing here is Alice in Wonderland, one of the first books that became very interactive, is that we're adding interactivity into our ebooks. It's not necessarily just a simple linear presentation of that content. Certainly some content is still very effective that way, but others need to be completely reset in order to optimize them in the environment of mobile. So some of the ebook issues that we're seeing, and this we're seeing over and over and over again, that when people are creating content, everybody's thinking about print, 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 print. It's still very much, let's create the print first, and then let's create the ebook afterwards. But the way we create print, and we've had centuries to perfect how content is printed in a print world, doesn't work effectively in an ebook world. So we have all sorts of issues like sidebars. Where does that wonderful, really useful information go? How do we make it accessible to people? Tables can be a real nightmare. How do we order our information so that it makes sense? And over and over and over again in every organization that we go into, they're saying that producing ebooks for multiple devices is a nightmare. So you could pick one, say the Apple OS, and you could do it just for iPhone and just for the tablet. But reality is that there are, at least at this point in time, other alternatives to that. So we have the Android. And then Android isn't on just one piece of hardware. It's on many different types of hardware. And we've got different types of tablets out there. We've got all sorts of different things that are impacting ebooks. It's not simple and straightforward, and we simply can't do a file save as. What we're seeing for the most part is that people are handcrafting the content in order to get it to work elsewhere. So as I said, they're creating their desktop version, and then they're recreating it, say, in a mobile app, or they're creating a print-based book, and then they're taking it into something like EPUB, and then they're taking that EPUB file out to yet another piece of software to optimize it for the look and the feel and interactivity and things like that. We don't have the time to do that. We don't have the bandwidth, we don't have the resources to continue to do that. And the devices are proliferating. On average, we're seeing approximately, a device appear approximately every 9 to 12 months. And that's for one company. So you can probably expect from Apple you're going to get a minimum of, say, one new iPhone over the course of the year and one new tablet over the course of the year. But when you interleave that with all the new Android devices and et cetera, and now there's 3 different iPads to support, and et cetera, there's way too many of them. And the functionality does vary across the devices. What works on one may not work on another. So we've got a constant churn where we're trying to figure out how do we make this work and how do we design our content so that it's going to be effective. And many organizations can't keep up. So that's really where adaptive content come in. So with adaptive content, as I said before, it automatically adjusts to different environments. It doesn't mean that we still don't have to think about what is the different environment and what is the impact. But once you've got an understanding of what that device is capable of, and you can say, these are my business rules that if someone is viewing my content on this device, when you see this type of information, automatically change it to something else. When you see different type of information, this is how we want you to handle it. You don't have to recreate that content in multiple ways. You've got one set of content, which can then be mapped to and converted out as it's going in. So really at that point, we have a single source for our information, and all we need to do when we've got a new device is to apply a new style sheet to that information and say, new device, fine. What's different about it? Okay, this is how we're going to handle it and have it then transformed as it is published or read within the different systems. So really at this point, our adaptive content is really only limited by the design decisions that we make. Obviously, the functionality of the device being used, we can't change that. Hardware is hardware, and software is software. And the intelligence of our content. So the intelligence is how can we prepare our content for adaptive content. So the ways in which we support adaptive content is through structure, through modularity, through identifying opportunities for reuse, and for format-free content. So it isn't focused on how it's going to look. It's focused on what kind of content is this information. So if we take a look at each of those in turn, let's take a look at what is structure. Well, essentially, structure is the hierarchical order in which content occurs in an information product. So an information product is like a web page. or it could be a printed book, or it could be an ebook, it could be a brochure, be it printed or online. It could be a training course, it could be anything. It is a product, which is content. And when we take a look at different types of information products, we can find that there are recognizable structures, or there should be, because we want them to be consistent. Something like, say, fiction, it's still got chapters. It may have ways in which the author is opening the information, transitioning the information, ending the chapter. But look at nonfiction, it is much more structured. When we take a look at content which typically appears on a website, it can be structured. When we take a look at product information, help materials, those sorts of things, they can all be structured. There's a recognizable way that we can create that information. So we have a consistent series of components or topics, and then those break down to further structure. So why do we have to structure our content? We need to move away from format. We need to move away from this being necessarily a heading 2. We still need to know that that is a heading or a title, but that piece of content might appear in one place where it's shifted down to the equivalent of a heading 3, whereas in another place it's a heading 1. So we just want to know that it's a heading, and we want to be able to know that the substructure within that, what is that information, so I know what to do with it. When we know that structure, we can automatically output it to multiple channels. And we can also mix and match content. We can say use this piece, and this piece, but not that piece. We can transform or configure that content from one structure to another. It doesn't always have to be exactly the same structure. And as I said before, we can filter it. We can layer it. On a traditional website, we would have a great deal more information. When we move it into a smartphone, we would want to layer it so that we are seeing the content. You've got the key information first. Maybe move between pages to see more detail, or maybe you scroll, etc. So we layer it. Here's an example of some structure of marketing materials. A lot of times when I explain structure, I explain it using recipes. And really, understanding structure using recipes is very easy. But most of the people say to me, all the companies I work with say, but we don't do recipes. So this is an example just using the marketing materials. And I've just done an Excel spreadsheet here. So let's say I've got a product overview page on my site. Well, what's in that structure? Well, I've got an overview to the information. I've got a value proposition. I've got information about the features and benefits. I may have some frequently asked questions. If we say move over to more brochure-like information, I've got a takeaway. When you're giving somebody a brochure, even if it's online, you want to say right up front, this is the key information I want you to remember when you leave this information. It may go into some of the challenges your customer is facing. Do you recognize yourself in this? There's that value proposition again. An overview, features and benefits. Sales training. How do you teach people how to market your products? Will have potentially a structure like I've shown here. And if we break it down and we go further into the information, here's an example of the value proposition. If I take a value proposition and I say, okay, what does a really well-written value proposition consist of? Well, you start off with what is the value. You can save 25% if you buy now. What are the competitive differentiators? You're faster, you're less expensive, you're more comprehensive, etc., etc. And some, as we see with many different products, they compare themselves to others. And then always, people go, oh, really cool, but how much does that cost? So the cost of offering. is associated with it. So I've taken a value proposition and I've broken it down further. And we can think about that in a variety of different ways. So if I've got my content broken down this way and I put together some information and I've written my, say, the value in a very particular way so that it's maybe less than 140 characters, I can have that automatically tweeted as part of a campaign. I can have that value appear in a certain spot, in a certain way on the website. I can have that come up in a different way on a smartphone, in another way on a tablet, which could be similar to your standard website or not. But because I know what that content is, I can manipulate it. I can do things with it. I can determine how I want that content to appear. And I do not have to change that content. I simply have to recognize it and then overlay it with the way in which I want to display it. As I said, reuse is very important when we're working with adaptive content because we want to understand where that content can be reused. So we can see the value proposition where it's being used in the product overview, an elevator pitch, it's in the brochure, it's in the sales training, et cetera, et cetera. And all of these products could be print. All of these products could be on the web. All of these information products could be available on a smartphone, a variety of different ways of accessing the information, but there's still that type of information. We just present them differently. And we need to have format-free content, or XML. We get frequently a lot of pushback when we start to talk about XML because people are very worried about XML. It's perceived as being really technical, pretty geeky. You know, I've heard people say to me, yeah, but it's really in your face. You know, you've got all these exposed tags. Well, you know what? It doesn't have to be that way. Yes, in the early days of XML, it was that way, just the same as it was in the early days of the web where people worked with HTML tags. Well, you don't have to do that anymore. It's now pretty much hidden in your standard authoring tools. And XML is pretty much everywhere today, and you probably don't even know it. So if you're using Microsoft Office 2007 or higher, you've probably noticed on the extension to that file, so you've got docx and pptx and sllx. Well, that X means that that content is XML based. It's no longer RTF basic Word. It's now XML. So it's there, and you're just not aware of it. So when we've got the XML, again, we're working with structure so we can form it for multiple channels because XML allows us to treat content like we would, say, data or applications or different things like that. It gives us so much more power to our content. Somebody's got to understand this stuff, probably somebody in your T group. But your authors don't need to understand the complexities of it, nor do many of the editors or anybody else who's involved with the standard content lifecycle. They don't have to know what's under the covers. We also need business rules because I have to be able to say, well, when you see that value proposition, what do I want to do with it in a particular situation? So these are rules which, again, a business analyst, a content strategist, someone can design these in words, and then someone else will translate that into the technology that's needed to support it. And they follow what you want to do with your different devices and your different customer requirements. And this is the business rules that allow the system to automatically pick and choose your content or adjust the presentation of that content to meet specific requirements. In essence, what you're doing with a business rule is you're saying, if this is the situation or the context in which the content finds itself, then do that with it. And so you define your business rules. So when we're working with content, I always say, you know, content is separate from format. But we still have to understand that content's going to go. And I always say we need to work backwards. We can't start at the content and then figure out later what we're going to do with it. We have to start at the other end. We have to understand what our customer needs. We have to know what their requirements are. And we have to know what your device constraints are. So we need to know what will or will not work in a particular situation. We need to be able then to take these two sets of requirements and map them back into our content. So we say, okay, well, we know we're going to need to provide this kind of information in this kind of a content on this kind of a device. So what do we need to create, and how does that content need to be structured? So a bit more detail on knowing your customers. Who are they? Who's your primary one? Who's your secondary one? What is their typical customer profile? Where do they come from? Are they coming from different regions? Are they coming from different countries? Is a different site bringing them to your information? Is a certain search engine bringing them in? What are they using? Is it Mac? Is it PC? Is it Android? You know, what is it? What do customers need to know to make the right buying decision? So what are they trying to do? What are the most effective ways to reach that customer? Okay, getting a little delay here. Okay, knowing your device constraints. And this is where I say, I got a small screen. So what do I have to do for that? How much information can I logically fit on that? So really, what is the impact in terms of my structure in that value? That's part of the value proposition. You know, really, how much space am I working with? So how much we say to people, write it this way so that we know that it's always going to fit. So you design your models to adapt to those constraints, and your models reflect your structure. We always run into issues with tables. Doesn't matter if it's on a website or it's on a smartphone, it's on an e-reader. Tables are always an issue. So just as an example, when we think about some of the constraints, let's think about it. Well, what happens with a table? Well, if you're working with a table and you know you've got a particular size of screen real estate that you can work with, then you can probably show the whole table. In a product something like Apple's fixed format, if you're doing an ebook, you know you're working with the iPad, you know what size that is, and then you can use it and you can do your table pretty much like you're doing it right now. But if you don't have that and you know it's going to be read on something else, possibly on a Kindle or on, say, a Kobo or something like that, you might want to move away from a traditional row column kind of table to an image of the table. So it detects that it is being viewed on a particular device, and it says, in this situation, I'm not going to show the regular table, I'm going to show an image of the table instead. And in that way, people can zoom in and take a look at it. You can also modularize tables. We've seen some pretty complicated tables, but just like you can modularize content and chunk it down, you can actually modularize tables as well. And you can say, well, you know, we're showing all sorts of different things in here. Let's chunk it out. Maybe that table becomes 4 tables. Now, it's not always great having 4 tables, but if they're readable tables, it's a whole lot better than having one table that's totally unreadable. If you're going to be extending some of the code that you're using for a mobile app, then you can do things like have a fixed first column. So just like you can in Excel, you could fix the first column, you could fix that, and then just scroll. So people can see a really broad table, and they scroll left to right. They don't lose their sense of place. If you don't have that option, you can also do it where you've got an overview kind of table, and they you can drill down in that information. So you just have to think outside of the box when you're thinking about tables. And with tables, we're pretty lucky because tables are inherently structured, so you need to just map what it is you want to do with them. We don't always have that content. So with our content, we need to ask a variety of different questions. What's the primary content that you want to display? What could be layered? What could be scrolled? How does it need to be structured so that we can filter it, layer it, scroll it? What content might we want to eliminate in a certain situation? So it becomes nice to have information. It's not critical information, so we don't necessarily show it. What other kinds of alternates to content could be presented? So maybe instead of a bunch of text, we have a chart which says it all, or a pie chart, or something like that that communicates to people. Then, again, working backwards, what do we have to do with our content to structure it to support this functionality? And can you also think about it, and we can't know everything, content. We will not always know in what situation it will be used. But if we really look at our content and make sure it's very modular, make sure it's nice and cleanly structured internally such that it can adapt to unexpected situations, we don't have to worry about it as much. It's much more effective. So again, thinking about that value proposition. Well, if I was pushing this to a mobile device, the value might be something that they'll see right off the bat. And if they want to know more about it, then I might have a link to the competitive differentiators. Or I might have a scroll page to the competitive differentiators. Same with the cost framework. So where, yes, people are making more selections, but they are being able to see the content instead of scroll, oh, and then back to the top again, and then, oh, down to the middle again, and up and down, and up and down, and up and down, that sort of thing. So because I have it structured, I can determine all sorts of things to do with that content. We also can't forget that when we're doing this, there's changing processes. So we want to make sure that people understand that, yes, it is a paradigm shift, and it is a different way of working. The biggest thing and the hardest thing that we find that we have to have people change the way they do things is that they can't tweak and tune content anymore, because then you're only thinking about it in a single situation. So some people will think, okay, well, what's my smallest common denominator I can work with? Let's start with that first, and then I can build onto that if I'm going from a smartphone up to, say, print, for example. So you've got to know what content is required by whom, when, in what circumstances, and in conjunction with what other content or interactivity. So we really think about our content in a very different way. We have to create that content in a structured way, which is separate from the format. So no more applying, 12-point blah 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 to the style to make it look okay. And in fact, in many cases, when you're working with structured content, even if you're working with your tools, something like Microsoft Word, you can constrain it so that people, sure, they can make it look readable for themselves as they're authoring, but when that content actually gets published, it's overlaid with a style sheet which they have control over. That might scare some people, but what you have to do is work together as a team to determine the most effective way of displaying that information so that the style sheet is then looked that way. And the other thing that I tell people is we have to think about creating content first, not necessarily mobile first or ebook first, because each time we pick a particular output, a particular format for our content, we get these little blinders on, and we think about it in that context, and we don't think about it how it could be used in a different context. And that's when your content will suffer, when it's adapted in a different way. As I said, even going back out to something like print, if you don't think about how that content can be augmented, say for a print environment, or how it's going to appear in print, just like going in the other and going to mobile, it's going to impact it negatively. So we have changing processes. So if we think about adaptive content, as I said, it automatically adjusts to different environments and device capabilities in order to deliver the best possible customer experience, filtering it, layering it for greater or lesser depth detail. We can no longer handcraft our content because creating multiple manual renditions of content is unsustainable. We need to develop structured, modular, reusable content for format-free materials that can be adapted to different devices. We have to think about what we need to do with our content and then work backwards to how to best prepare that content intelligently so it can be consumed for adaptive delivery. And we need to change our processes to make sure that people are working in the new paradigm. So I'd like to open it up for questions now, but just before I do that, I'm just showing a couple of books here. In this 1 hour presentation, there's only so much I can tell you about creating something like adaptive content, and I'm really excited to say that our book, Managing Enterprise Content, a Unified Content Strategy, brand new 2nd edition, was just published 2 weeks ago. And it is completely about what we've been talking about here. So it goes into much more depth. So there's over 360 pages worth of information talking about all the different aspects that I've just touched upon here. And it's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Peach Pit, who is the publisher. We also have a book which we have self-published called Ebooks 101. And it goes through these concepts, but very much focused on the ebook world specifically. And that's available for free. If you email moreinfo@rockley.com, we will give you a link to a Kindle or an EPUB, which works on your iPad, iPhone, etc. So you'll get a free copy of that as well. So, questions. Do we have any questions from the audience?
We've got a couple in so far. We have one that says, how do you convince quote-unquote creative types to resist generating structured content, much less adaptive content?
Yes. And creative people, they often find that they resist that as they're first getting started. But we work really, really closely with creative types. So we've worked with marketing people, we've worked with instructional designers who create very interactive, creative materials. And in actuality, when they begin to understand what's meant by structure and what's meant by doing content in a structured way, they actually like it a lot. One of our clients said to us that structure sets you free because what they're able to focus on is the content itself and the most effective way of communicating it. And we sometimes see people transition, so where they were mainly in a more writing type, like a marketing communications type person, they may transition more into a visual designer and working with the design of all of these information products on the other side of things. And think, as I said, many of you will find whether it's instructional design, they use storyboards, whether it's marketing materials, they often have campaign structures that they need to follow, whether it's product information, then they have certain things that they need to do, and that's just structure. And what we need to do is understand their structure and make sure we optimize it for them so that they're not feeling restricted by it, that they're just finding that it frees them to focus on what's really
We have another one here that says, work backwards and develop content first. Sounds contradictory. Can you explain this a little bit?
Yes. What I mean by that, and you're quite right, it does sound a bit contradictory. What we need to do in the sense of working backwards, we need to understand all of our constraints. So it isn't just about, like I hear all the time, people say mobile first. And then what they're doing is they're focusing on mobile presentation and delivery to the exclusion of, say, a more traditional website, or the exclusion of print. And when you do that to the exclusion of the other things, then you are not understanding the full scope and the way in which your content can be used. So in that sense, you have to understand the whole scope, and then you start the content and preparing it to then support all of those different aspects of your scope. So maybe what I really probably should say is to the middle, because you have to understand where it's going, and you have to understand how to prep it to make sure it can, to write it and then prep it so that it can go out effectively.
You mentioned using structured writing guidelines. Are any such guidelines published somewhere?
Everybody's content is different. And when I say that is that each organization typically develops their own structured writing guidelines. So in the book, there is an example where I've taken the value proposition and I have shown a set of writing guidelines that are associated with writing an effective value proposition for that organization. You know, a medical devices company, the kind of information they're communicating is going to be very different from a telecommunications company that's selling you a smartphone. So you can't have exactly the same writing guidelines because your content is different and therefore your structure is different. But there are concepts which I teach in the book and many of the other books I've written over the years.
All right. Can you tell us about any mature platforms for adaptive content that truly cover the range of potential outputs? Seems like they're more specialized to a subset of mediums.
And I would agree that they are frequently, right now, for a particular subset of mediums. What we typically do is we create our content, we make sure that it's in XML, then we push that content out to multiple mature platforms that can then take that content and push it out in the way that's did. So we still have our single source at the front, we still only change one location, but we may use different tools. So for example, if you're printing something, you're going to use something like InDesign or potentially Quark Express. And that's going to be entirely different from what you would use to, say, go out to an Ebook, so going out to EPUB, or, again, something else that's going to take you out to HTML5. So we get it to a point where then we push it to each of the software and the platforms and then push it out to the different devices.
How about this one? What's the importance of the relationship between metadata and adaptive content? Is adaptive content possible without fabulous metadata?
Okay, what's the relationship between metadata and adaptive content? You can have content that doesn't have metadata that can be adapted, but it's not going to be as good as content which is tagged to help you understand what your content is. Now, your tagging can be as simple as structure. So the value is a piece of metadata. It's telling what type of content that is. Competitive differentiators is telling me what kind of content that is. But I might want to augment that to say something like, okay, here's my value proposition when I'm speaking about this product in North America, but I might have a very different value proposition when I'm talking to someone in Japan or someone in the UK. So I need to add additional information, which is the metadata, to say that this content is applicable in this region and not that region, or for this customer and not that customer. So you could, but it's significantly better if you've got metadata, and it doesn't have to be exhaustive. It just but you want to hit the high points.
What systems are available that offer the production of adaptive content?
What systems are available? Well, you've got different aspects of the whole thing. So at the front end, we've got authoring tools. In the middle part, we really need to have a content management system. Certainly you could do it without content management, but I don't really want to go there. It's too hard. And then you've got, as I said, you've got all these different ways in which you can produce your content. And it really depends upon what you're trying to do. It could be something that takes you out to HTML5. It could be something that takes you out to EPUB, then takes you out to Mobi. There are literally thousands of different tools out there, and it's very hard for me to say explicitly. But those are the major ones that you're going to need. You're going to need authoring, you're going to need content management, and you're going to need production tools.
You know, we've actually got a couple of people asking about DITA. So one of them is, do you recommend DITA for structure?
DITA is definitely a structure that could be used. For those of you that are not familiar with DITA, DITA stands for Darwin Information Typing Architecture. It's one of the fastest growing XML standards available for content today. It was originally designed for technical publication, so people are doing product content. But in the last few years, it's moved beyond that. It's being used in pharmaceuticals, being used in medical devices, it's being used in publishing. So there's a particular version of it called DITA for Publishers. And what this is it's a structure which been agreed upon. It is a standard. And as a standard, it means that it's recognized by a lot of different tools. It's recognized by a lot of people. There's a growing body of knowledge about it, et cetera, et cetera. So you're saving some of the time that you would need in order to structure your content. But I have one caveat when using DITA. I think it's extremely important that if people choose to use DITA, and it can be extremely effective, is that in an environment where we do not have technical writers, then it must be invisible to the content contributors. So we must use friendly authoring, editing, publishing tools, because technical writers don't use code, but a lot of people don't. And so it has to be hidden under the covers. And it can definitely be used for adaptive content.
I actually really like this one. How long can an organization expect it to take to change from a traditional medium-first publishing model to one that produces adaptive content that works in those mediums? Please don't say years.
Well, I'll say that it's probably going to take you a year to do it. Now, it doesn't mean that you won't be producing content that way earlier than that. 6 months would be highly aggressive because you've got to analyze your content, restructure your content, select your tools, et cetera, et cetera. But you can certainly be doing potentially a single product or maybe a product information product line at that point, or a book series or something like that, whatever you happen to have. So you're doing more of a pilot around about the 6-month mark. And we see organizations rolling it out to the rest of their product suite, their information products, over the course typically of 9 to 12 months. And I know when you say, don't say years, I mean, that's just totally unrealistic, because what we were designing for 1 year is not going to be the same as what we're designing for 6 months, a year, 6 months from now. So you can do it at least to the prototype or pilot stage, typically in 6 months. But you need to make sure that your organization is willing to put some resources against that in order to make it happen. They can't just do all their day job and then expect to make all this happen as
well. Regarding rendering tables as images for mobile devices, is there an automated way to do that? Our content is XML based and very tabular by nature.
There are some tools which do it. And we have companies that have sort of built their own little algorithms to do it. But I mean, say something like in like a composition tool, which then normally appears in print. There's a way of sort of doing screen grab on it of the table and exporting it as an image. So if you've got lots and lots of them, it's well worth taking a look at your tools and seeing what they have. And then there are some, probably not as many as I would like to see, and certainly not for every tool you may be using.
How about, aren't the parameters of what is adaptive really set by the people who will be programming for the various delivery modalities?
Yes and no. When the people who are doing the programming set the parameters with an understanding of the content, you have bad products at the other end. And I'm not saying anything negative against the people who are programming. Their focus is the programming. When you have people who are people who are setting the parameters without understanding the technology and some of those constraints, you also have bad content, and you have programmers who are pulling their hair out trying to get stuff to work. And you have to have a multidisciplinary team working from the beginning to understand your goals, your objectives, and what you're trying to do. And then each of you input your knowledge to that multidisciplinary team. So as a group, you can make informed decisions that are then going to optimize your content and the technology.
Here's a good follow-up for that one. Do you recommend having a single overseeing role with an overarching view of the content, someone who has an overall view of the different delivery channels and required presentation requirements?
Absolutely. It's critical for someone who has that big picture understanding. And companies look at that role in very many different ways, but it could be a very senior content strategist. It could be somebody very high up in the marketing communications or some communications group. But somebody has to see the big picture, because too many organizations are siloed. They're focused on their piece of their responsibility, and then you don't end up with an effective content strategy at the other end.
Do you find that, what? Are you going to say something?
I was just going to say, I think we probably have time for maybe one more question, and then that'll be it.
Yep. Do you find that consumers use the devices differently to access and brand content, like using airline sites for an example? They may be more apt to plan on their PC or on their tablet device, while with their mobile device they may be more apt to seek on-the-go information like flight schedule. What are your thoughts concerning the same content?
It is very true that people look at content a different way, and so something like that where you're trying to figure out things, you may be using a larger system, something like a tablet or a laptop or something of that nature, and then using the smartphone that either keeps track of it, say something like, a TripIt or something like that, where you know what's happening. But that all comes down to understanding your customer and what are they doing with each of the devices when they're doing it. So in that way, then you can say, well, what content does somebody need at that point in time? Are we going to give them the entire reservation system working on a smartphone? Or no, maybe not, depends. Or we're going to give them the ability to track the status flight, ability to see alternate flights, things like that, get information when they're delayed, and we're going to give them the full functionality somewhere else. So that's where content and application come together, and we need to understand what content needs where and when, and it could be exactly the same content but filtered differently depending upon what they're doing with it.
All right.
So that was great. If there are other questions that I haven't been able to answer, I'm happy to be able to do that.
Yeah, I have a couple more, Al, that if anyone didn't have them answered, you can email Ann also.
Okay, you see my email at the bottom. All right, well, thanks very much, everybody. I really appreciate you participating today.
Thank you very much, Ann.
Thank you.